Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I thank you, Shola Onikoko, for the bio, and thank you, the Nigeria Business Disability Network, for inviting me to make this presentation. It is historic. In years back, we used to struggle as people with disabilities to engage the private sector. And I'm delighted that in our lifetime, we can see the private sector converge for our sake. I think we should appreciate the private sector more. This is a huge leap we have made forward as far as disability inclusion is concerned. And it's like irreversible. We thank you again. Now, if we must eliminate barriers in the workplace, we must know a few things about where we are. Like the chair of the NBDN, she said that it's still work in progress. And we need to know where we are and then know where we want to get to and how we will get there. We have a huge nation of people with disabilities in Nigeria. And if we use the UN prevalence rate of 15%, we're about 30 million or more. That's a population of so many countries. And of that population, close to 18 million are of working age. And let me shock you, of that 18 million, only about 0.3% are gainfully employed. And again, of the very little, small number that is employed, many of them have reported experiencing different types of barriers in their places of work. In 2016 or 17, Lagos State government employed for the first time up to 300 persons with disabilities at a time. That's at a go. Now, I was privileged to be in a particular ministry where one of the newly employed was posted to. And the discussion about how she will perform her duty was on when I walked into a director's office. And the ministry didn't even know how to enable that newly deployed employee perform her duties. I remember then I did a quick scoping study to find out what is happening. And that kind of incident was reported across most of the MDAs that I surveyed at that time. So it's one thing to create the jobs. It's another thing for the employees to be able to do their jobs. That is for even governments. But for the private sector, the challenge even begins from the entry point. So if you cannot even get in, as you know, in the first place, how do you now do your work? So these barriers come in various shapes and sizes. But typically in our sector, there are three: the attitudinal, the behavioral, the institutional barriers, and the environmental barriers. Many of us here, especially in the NBDN, like the chairperson said, would have gone through some of these processes with Project Enable, with Site Savers, conducting all of these accessibility audits and taking you through. So I won't bore you, except for those who might not have gone through that process. The barriers are mostly broken into three. The attitudinal, we all know, being the behavior, the perception, which are mostly negative about people with disabilities. Can they walk? Can they do this? Some of these attitudes are driven by cultural or religious beliefs, or even sheer ignorance about disability itself. And that's why when we conduct, for those that have been involved in, have worked in their accessibility audit, there's no way you won't go through what we call our disability 101. What is disability? Who are people with disabilities? What are the various barriers, the models, and so on? We take you through all of those processes so that you appreciate who people with disabilities are. Because if you don't know us, you can't engage us. So, why do we need to employ people with disabilities? Like the ES said, it's a fundamental right according to the laws of the land, beginning with our Constitution as amended 1999, up to the various laws and policies of government at state and national level, and up to the various international statutes to which Nigeria has committed to, two of which are the UN Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities and the Sustainable Development Goals, respectively. Not also forgetting the ILO Convention. So it's a right. It's also a social responsibility. And through this, we establish employment as a process of providing social security, basic social security, to everybody who have the capacity to work. It's an economic strategy to ensure that we are able to produce and redistribute wealth equitably. Or if you employ people, they generate wealth, they produce wealth, they redistribute wealth. Okay? It also makes good business sense to attract the best that you can find around. And the best here does not regard whether your social status, whether you are male or female, or you are able or disabled, or where you come from. What MTN, Standard Chartered Bank, Access Bank, Airtel and Co. are interested in is, can you deliver profit, to ensure that we are able to make profit, we are viable, we are sustainable. That's what they want. It's also an appropriate approach to sustainable development. Because if we are saying we leave no one behind, and you count millions of people who are not employed or underemployed, especially people with disabilities, then we cannot fulfill that goal of leaving no one behind. Then we all go to churches and mosques. Even if you don't go to either of them, morality is morality. It is also morally right to create opportunities for everyone, fairly, justly, equitably, without discrimination of any sort, and so on. So I want to believe that every member of NBDN and other potential members who will sign up after, you believe in all of these values. Am I correct? So this is why we must employ PWDs. It's a human right. We are all promoters of human rights. It's a social responsibility. We all carry out one social initiative or the other. It makes good business sense, and so on. Now, there are a lot of evidence of success stories. When we walked in here, we saw the documentary that was screened of some of the success stories of what Project Enable and other partners have been doing, trying to get persons with disabilities into formal employment. The story is the same everywhere. People with disabilities tend to stay more on their jobs. Companies that employ people with disabilities are more socially responsible. You can go on, and research has proven all of this. Accenture is a very popular organization that carries out research around disability inclusion. You can go and study. Let me not bore you with all the statistics. Just Google Accenture and you see the beautiful data and evidence they have generated to demonstrate to us that it is all plus, no minus. The evidence are strong, indisputable, that when companies employ persons with disabilities, they perform better than those who do not. And that's why I said earlier that it makes good business sense. But why do you need to have high turnover of staff when you can employ those that will stay put more and stay focused more? These are qualities Shola himself can testify to in the experience they've had trying to place persons with disabilities in formal jobs. So, but then, despite all of this evidence, why do barriers still persist? Why do we still have this case of, having barriers in the workplace? One of the biggest challenges is knowledge and awareness. I doubt, if I ask many of the NBDN members, your training modules, have you revised them? Are they disability sensitive? Your induction, onboarding modules, and other capacity building programs you have for your staff. That is where it begins. And if we don't build a strong knowledge base around disability inclusion across all cadre of staff, then there's a problem. It is one thing for the directors and the MDs and the top management to put the policy in place. A gate man or a security personnel can rubbish all that you have done and destroy the face of inclusion that you have if it does not cut across all cadre of staff. Again, the government, especially the disability agencies, need to do more around media. Now that we are having so many states setting up disability agencies, the media should be agog with disability awareness campaigns so that they can support what the private sector is doing now to raise awareness. Say my people perish because they lack knowledge. Communication barrier is another thing. I decided to select these ones. They usually box them under those three that I mentioned earlier: attitudinal, institutional, and environmental. But these are some that are very key to the corporate environment. Based on the experiences we've had while engaging some of you in your disability accessibility audits, At least I've lost count of how many of those that I've been involved in. And these factors I'm mentioning now are recurring factors. I talked about knowledge and awareness. Now it's communication. Your internal and external communication, content and platforms. How do they mainstream disability? And not just one disability, generically responding to the various disability types. We have a sign language interpreter beside me here. There are so many corporate communication, content and platforms that we've seen that do not take cognizance, even in your adverts, in your promos, in the way you design your brands, the colors. Do you consider those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, with dyslexia and so on, who might also need to appreciate that new branding, new labeling, new logo, and all of that you are putting out there? Because just like the ES said, the bank does not know money coming from a person with disability. Money is MTN does not know if it's a blind person buying data or airtime. Unilever does not know who is buying soap or who is buying. The point is, every chunk of the market must not be taken for granted. Absence of reasonable accommodation. This is a very strong point that the private sector is not exploring extensively. And here we are talking about adapting work processes reasonably to accommodate or to respond to different disability types. For example, working from home. COVID has taught us that we all don't have to be in the office, isn't it? And you save a lot of space, a lot of energy, a lot of resources. Driving, look at what traffic is doing to us in Lagos. And you know what? People with disabilities will profit more from an effective virtual working process, especially due to lack of our very inaccessible public transport and public infrastructure. So we can all still remain in our homes due to the lack of, the inaccessible environment we have. Remember I said the barrier is also environmental. And still continue to contribute to productivity. So you can even employ PWDs in their homes and they can still support your businesses and perform very well. So, and other levels of reasonable accommodation, use of assistive technologies. Okay? Provision of workplace therapies. These are all examples of reasonable accommodation. If an employee is delivering for you and you are making huge profits, in the long run, you won't think about what you are spending to keep that. Just like, look, I always make reference to the football team theory. You need to look at the humongous amounts football clubs spend on a particular player to keep that player in the team. Let's go and do a bit of research around the use of football team theory. And you ask yourself, why? Some of you do it in the private sector. You believe in a particular personnel and you want to keep that person because he's giving you what you need. You can also find that among PWDs, but they need reasonable accommodation. Then you also have low level of, universally usable designs. You don't find universally designed lifts that can be operated by blind people, by people on wheelchair. These are some of the things we point out to you when we come to do accessibility audits. Universal design. That's one of the hallmarks of disability inclusion. We can't produce different things for different people all the time. And that's why the idea of universal design is coming. So in the workplace, the tools you use, the computers you procure, the furniture, they can be adapted to support as many people as possible. And it saves you cost in the long run. And then the low capacity, institutional capacity of the companies themselves to utilize the potentials of persons with disabilities. And this comes in three ways. There is this lack that, in the understanding of the scope of capacity of PWDs. People still reason along the charity and medical lines or understanding of disability. We need to change that. The second point is that the potential benefits that employing people with disabilities can bring. I just talked about it. They stay more on the jobs, they are focused, in the long run, they cost you less. And then lastly, misconceptions about the cost versus the return on investment. So you buy a laptop for a blind staff, and then you install a software called JAWS, maybe that costs about nearly ₦1 million. But you are thinking, oh, why employ this blind person when I can just buy an ordinary laptop and hand over to a sighted person? Again, in the long run, you will have contributed to reducing poverty that will come in diverse dimensions, and then improve your productivity as an organization. So at the end of the day, you save that investment. So these are some of the barriers that we experience in the workplace. These are some of the things, from knowledge to communication to reasonable accommodation to universal design, and the capacity of the company itself to recognize these opportunities, these potentials. So how do we now lay the foundation? And that's where I'll try and anchor on. Because at the end of the day, it's the solutions. And I know that by the time the panelists come up, they will share some experience with us around what they have done to overcome some of these barriers. So you see a lot of examples. So I'll just share a few with us, and then allow the panelists to, expatiate on them. But there are things that business organizations need to do, and it begins with the leadership commitment. That is, the leaders, the managers and owners are ready to abide by those reasons why we must employ PWDs. Communicating this across the organization is very important. Taking advantage of technology or assistive technology to overcome these barriers. Ensuring that your environment, your physical infrastructure, including even furniture and so on, are accessible. And that also speaks to universal design. And then also preaching the gospel of disability inclusion to those that do business with you, your suppliers, your marketers, and so on. And then demonstrating that exemplarity through other initiatives, through your other social, corporate social initiatives. All of these are things that businesses must put forward to be able to demonstrate effectively that they are an inclusive employer. And of course, we must be able to remove all entry point barriers. I'm sure that CIPM and the HR people are doing a lot to remove this. The process of how you advertise your recruitment, the process of interviews where we did a lot of this with CIPM, and I'm sure that is being taken forward, and that's why we even have this network in the first place. And so if we're able to respond to all these barriers that I've highlighted, and we position our organizations from the leadership to the last person on the ladder, I think we'll be able to go far. We don't need to overflog the issue. All we need is for you to remove the barriers. And that, I think, the NBDN has started doing already. We only need to expand the scope and bring in more converts into the network so that the lives of people with disabilities and the life of our society as a whole can continue to improve. It is only inclusive societies that thrive, progress, and develop sustainably. Thank you.